are quite outraged by your visit to Sri Lanka. Given that even some of the new evidence are unearthed, what do you like to tell them right now after this meeting with some of the Tamils as well, Tamil representatives?
Well, I think it's important to go to the Commonwealth Conference because I support the Commonwealth and the institution of which we're a leading member. But no one should be in any doubt that I go to Sri Lanka with a very clear message about the wrongdoing of the past and the need to get the future right, and that big changes need to be made. It's appalling, some of the things that have happened in Sri Lanka, and it's absolutely vital that a proper shared future is delivered for everyone in Sri Lanka, and I will not be backward in making those points.
Have you seen the recent documentary by Channel 4, which indicates clear evidence of war crimes, and what do you believe, that whether these war crimes took place there or not?
Well, I've seen this film, and it is chilling, there's no doubt about that, and that just strengthens the case for a proper independent inquiry. And if that independent inquiry isn't carried out, it needs to be carried out on an international basis, and I'm absolutely clear about that, and we'll make that point when I go to Sri Lanka.
But this has been repeated to the government by your ministers, this government, and also previously in various countries, Canada, and so on. This government not listening, basically the Sri Lankan government. And what can be done to make it listen while you're there?
Well, I think the best way to make sure they do listen is to go rather than to stay away. If I stayed away, some of the British cameras would stay away, some of the British press would stay away. I want to take the press, the cameras with me. I want to shine a light on what has happened in Sri Lanka and put the government under pressure to do the right thing for everyone in Sri Lanka in the future. I believe that's the right approach. Now, I know that is a controversial decision, but in the end, you have to make your decision, make your arguments, and I think it's better to make it there, in the room, making those arguments, rather than staying away. Thank you very much.
So we saw that interview where Cameron commenting on your film, saying that it has further strengthened the call for the investigation into the war crimes that took place in Sri Lanka. I mean, what is your reaction to that? Do you believe what he was actually saying there?
Well, I think what he says, insofar as it goes, I think is entirely correct. There is clearly a need for an independent inquiry. The point is, what kind of independent inquiry? And the problem is that for 4 years now, people have been calling on Sri Lanka, or Sri Lanka has had the opportunity to mount its own independent inquiry, genuine, credible independent inquiry, and it has failed to do so. It has demonstrated that it is neither capable nor willing of mounting such an inquiry, and that is abundantly clear now. And so the question is, why is the international community still giving them more time and still saying, well, we'll give you another little while? I'm glad to hear David Cameron saying, if it fails to mount a credible inquiry, there needs to be an international one. That is a very important and a positive step, I believe. But the fact is that it is already clear that they have failed to do it, and it is already clear that they're not going to do one. Therefore, I think that what Cameron should be saying, and what people should be saying at Chogam, is we need to mount that independent international inquiry now. Now, the procedure by which that will happen is that it will come up at the United Nations Human Rights Council in March. I think that's the nearest, realistic time when I believe that such a resolution, such a proposal can be formally passed and the process started, whatever form the process takes. But it seems to me that everybody should be saying here and now, that's got to happen. It seems to me that India has no choice but to show leadership in that move, because India has to deal with this situation. India has to show leadership. The world is looking to India to show leadership on this, and they have to take up this call. So, I think the Sri Lankan government will come back and say, we have had our own inquiry. They'll refer to the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. But I mean, if we look at the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, it didn't mention, the word war crimes was mentioned once. This is from memory, but I'm sure this is true. It was mentioned once in a little sub-note at the bottom, which was referring to another report. That was the only mention of war crimes. The mention of crimes against humanity, not once in the entire report. Do a word search, it's not there. Now, that is an extraordinary, I mean, to claim that that is some kind of independent investigation into the war crimes and the crimes against humanity is, of course, preposterous. They don't even mention them, let alone reach any conclusion, in a sense. Where they did make suggestions, for example, that cultural and religious observations should be allowed and encouraged and observed, that the army should withdraw from civilian activity. In fact, the army budget has gone shooting up and they're more and more involved. Ministry of Defence, has this.
None of these LLRC implementation.
None of them. None of the good recommendations
Yeah.
they made have happened,
Yeah.
and they did not confront any of the issues. So the bottom line is quite clear. There needs to be an independent international inquiry. And Cameron has mentioned it. He says that it's on the horizon.
Yeah.
He needs to say that's what's needed.
Yeah, I want to
now.
ask you another question, but before that, although viewers can call to talk to Callum, call on 0208 814 6565. You can call now if you've got questions or comments to Callum Macrae. But on the question about this, the CHOGM and the British government, it's quite, they're saying that is how they're going to make a difference. But in generally, the Tamil-speaking people don't believe that. By not going, he could have made a stronger message, one thing. The second is that how much we should believe, how can we believe that this is going to happen? There is no time limit on this. It's been said for a long time. It's 4 years since past. You produced 2 documentaries clearly indicating various shocking footages. And it is also absolutely clear that the Sri Lankan government is not going to deliver on this, as you said just now. So it is absolutely clear in our mind that it is not going to happen. So why it's evasive? Why this British government still evasive? And why, in a way, should we say they're lying to the people in Britain that they will do something about it? Because there's nothing on the plate.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the time is now to set up an international independent inquiry, because it seems to me that, as I say, it has been demonstrated Sri Lanka has no ability or intention to do such an inquiry. How could they? Why would they? They're investigating themselves, and that they're not going to do, because they know they're guilty. So, of course, that is the message that I think needs to go out far and wide. I mean, that is why we've made these films. Why is nobody listening? Well, we just have to make the point louder.
Can we expect from this particular government, because it's very unpopular at this stage in Britain, with various cuts and services taking place, and there's likelihood that they might lose in the next election as well, and so on. So what can we expect from this government in a realistic term?
I think I'm a journalist who is telling the truth about what happened in Sri Lanka, despite what anybody will tell you, or despite what the Sri Lankan government. That's my job. I certainly hope that truth will be listened to, and I certainly hope that truth will be acted on. I see no signs of it being acted on just now. So I think that people need to be, continuing the pressure. I think people continue to make the calls. I think we need to, to be heard, we need to talk louder. I have to say, I'm glad that Cameron has seen the film. I'm glad he's admitted and said he'd seen the film, and I'm glad he said that he found it shocking. I think anyone who's seen the film does find it shocking. I still find it shocking when I look at
Absolutely.
it. I mean, it is a horrible, horrible series of events. That's the message we have to keep getting out, and that something has to be done. And I think that actually, we're seeing Hague and Cameron. It's very frustrating. It's very, very slow. But I think we are seeing more of a response than we did see a few months ago. And maybe, justice will come.
But you are likely to go to cover the CHOGM event in Sri Lanka?
I'm leaving for CHOGM, yes.
Yeah, I mean, how is that going to be? I mean, will you be? I mean, what do you expect, and what are you preparing to do when you are very unpopular with the government?
I'm not the most popular man in Sri Lanka. All I'm going to do is try and do my job. I do keep coming back to this. I mean, they may think of me what they want. I am, in fact, nothing other than a journalist who has investigated this story and is trying to tell the truth about it, and trying to keep on telling the truth about it. And I will go on as a journalist investigating it. I will go on as a journalist reporting on what's happening, and I will go on as a journalist and filmmaker describing it. And I'm going to CHOGM to do my job. I don't think, in a sense, there's no mystery about what I'm doing. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it to find out what's happening, to tell the story. What is interesting to see is what do they do, and do they accept that journalists have the right to do that? Do they accept that journalists have the right to travel? Do they accept that journalists have the right to talk to people? And more importantly, and in fact most importantly of all, do they accept that people have the right to talk to me without repercussions? And that, of course, is very, very important. And that is a matter of considerable concern to me, that if I go and talk to people, will they be safe? Can they talk to me freely? Will the government let them? And indeed, should I even talk to people given the danger? That's the extraordinary situation you find yourself in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I mean, you know that the pre-media movement, a couple of journalists, Jackie Park and John Worthington, were just kicked out of the country recently, and they said there will be a clamp down on the other journalists and so on, following from that. But because of those journalists who talk to them will be investigated, etc., etc. Exactly, precisely the point that you're saying, which is the case. But another problem is that they will allow you, and then they will escort you, and then things that they want you to see is the so-called development or certain buildings of roads and things like that, and see this. Everything is normal. Quite a large part of the war-torn area has been cleaned up. In some places, the military is building resorts, for example. So they wanted you to see that and say, look, this is an improvement, and so on.
I'm quite sure that they are perfectly capable of taking me and other journalists on a little tour of nice hotels and nice beaches, and where I will see a few people who are lined up to say nice things to me about how happy they are. I hope I know enough about the situation to it is my job as a journalist, and it's other people's journalists' job as well, and I hope they will, I believe they will, to get beneath that. We know that when Navi Pillay went, various checkpoints were taken down and put back up again as soon as she'd gone. We know that people she spoke to were harassed after she'd been there. We know that they keep the army in barracks when there are people walking around. We know that we cannot expect to see the sexual violence, the harassment, the torture, the beating. That will be kept well secret from us. We will be shown the new roads. We will be shown the nice, the new building. We'll be shown villages and fishermen. We won't be told that some of those are singular fishermen, singular families, singular fishermen. I'm sure perfectly decent people who are not doing anything wrong. They've simply been encouraged to go there by the government. But they're being used as part of this plantation to destroy and to ethnically re-engineer the north. So as journalists, we have to see beyond what we're shown.
I mean, you're right. I mean, this is the problem that the journalists who are going there would face it. There was a beautification project run by military, defense ministry in Colombo, and got a lot of changes, and it would be absolutely difficult to get across. Do you have, I mean, what would be the reaction? If you could also be returned back from the airport, we don't know that. But will you be able to at least to go certain places? Have you requested them to visit certain places?
I expect to go there and do my job, and part of my job. I mean, one of the issues at CHOGM, I mean, what is the point of the Commonwealth? One of the core values of the Commonwealth are democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and all the implications that follow from that, like a free press. Those are issues which are at the heart of the Commonwealth agenda. Maybe not specifically on the agenda, but they're at the heart of the Commonwealth agenda. And if I'm going there to report on the Commonwealth and how the Commonwealth is working and how the Commonwealth is doing at its most important summit, then I expect to be able to report on how the new chair of the Commonwealth is behaving in its own country. That means that my duty as a reporter on the Commonwealth is to travel around the country, is to see these places, is to ask questions about the health of democracy, the health of human rights, and the health of the independence of the judiciary in Sri Lanka.
That's correct. I mean, there's another question, because some of the journalists will accuse that, the British colonial hypocrisy, they would say that, there is a war. It's a standard criticism that you normally face is that the war crime of Britain in Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on and so forth, and what did you do, and how the media covered, and so on and so forth. What would it be? For example, Diane Jethalaga famously said that I wouldn't buy a used car from the British government, let alone war crime accusation.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a phone call, but just to briefly answer your question, you look at my record. What have I made films about? I've made films investigating allegations of war crimes by the coalition. I've made in Iraq. I've made 3 films. There is currently a big inquiry going on caused by a film I made, which investigated allegations of war crimes by the British. So the suggestion that I am a journalist, I investigate war crimes, whether it's the British, whether it's the Tamil Tigers, or whether it's the Sri Lankan government. It's my job. Yeah, so I mean, I mean, the idea that there is something funny going on. I mean, what is happening is that Rajapaksa, having used the language of the war on terror and having hidden behind the West's language of the war on terror throughout the massacres at the end of the war, then turned things on their head and suddenly said, now the West must back off, the West must leave us alone, who is the West to lecture us about human rights, and so on. He made a speech at the UN in which he said, we need to find our own homegrown solutions. We need to find our own indigenous solutions. Now, that played well in certain quarters. I mean, that seems to people who may not have understood the situation, may not have had, to seem like a logical thing to do, because I have some sympathy with those who say, who is the West to lecture us about human rights? I mean, there's actually a view that I have some sympathy with.